Hey guys, tonight we descend into the raucous absurdity of a long-forgotten evening. A 13th century banquet that began with high hopes and ended, quite literally, with a food fight. You're not a knight, or a lady of the court, or even the cook, thankfully. No, tonight you're an invited guest, an important one. You've received an official wax-sealed invitation to attend the grand harvest feast of Lord Osric of Glenmere. You're meant to sit 2 tables from the dais, sip ale from imported mugs, and nibble on trenchers so fresh they still steam that it all sounds delightful. Until you arrive. The gates of Glenmere are already pulsing with chaos. You can smell the roasted goose from 2 fields away, but the air is tinged with something less savory. Panic. Nobles in embroidered tunics jostle against knights still in partial armor, and the stable boys have abandoned their posts to gawk at the growing tension near the drawbridge. There's a problem, of course there is. Your invitation, folded neatly in your belt pouch, says you're to be seated to the right of Sir Aldred of Dunhold. That sounds safe enough, except Sir Aldred is also supposed to sit to the right of Lady Maven of Balsmere, who refuses to dine next to him after the incident with the boar hunt and the crossbow. Don't ask. And Lady Maven insists on being adjacent to Bishop Heron, who, naturally, has just declared that he will not eat in the same room as Lord Osric's bastard son, who's now pretending to be the cupbearer for dramatic effect. You haven't even crossed the threshold yet. Inside the great hall, servants rush to add more benches. One man is hammering a plank to the end of a trestle table so wildly that he smashes a wine jug, red liquid seeping into the rushes like a sacrificial offering. The harper, bless him, keeps playing through it all, his lute strings trembling more from tension than tune. Your cloak is taken by a child who might be a servant or might just be cold. Either way, it's gone now. You find your seat, somehow, and you try to settle in. The person to your left mutters something about this not being the real salt, while the man across from you dips his bread directly into a shared dish of eel jelly. So far, so medieval. But it all escalates when Lord Osric himself appears. He's fashionably late, flanked by 2 hounds and wearing a tunic embroidered with grapes, boars, and, unexpectedly, a lute. He raises his hands for quiet, and for a moment, the room stills. I welcome you all, he booms, to this feast of harvest, of bounty, and above all harmony. A lie. Because just then, Lady Maven stands up and points. Why is he here? She demands, eyes locked on the bastard son/cupbearer, who is now balancing a platter of boiled carp like it's a game. Lord Osric sighs audibly. Because he's my heir, he mutters, mostly to his wine goblet. And with that, the real entertainment begins. The bishop refuses to bless the meal. Half the guests stand up to protest. The kitchen doors swing open as the first course is brought in. Turnip pasties, though half are charred black, and the shouting now competes with the clattering of pewter. Sir Aldred bangs his goblet against the table in protest and is promptly ignored. You, meanwhile, decide to try the eel jelly after all that it's wet. Historians still argue whether feasts like these were ever as chaotic as the records suggest. Some point to courtly etiquette manuals describing precisely how one must lean when accepting a goblet, never to the left, always gracefully toward the host. Others say those guides were wishful thinking at best. Judging by the scene unfolding in front of you, the latter seems more likely. The roasted goose is brought out, but no one claps. That's how tense things are. A knight at the lower table drops his trencher and it splashes onto a lord's cloak. The lord says nothing, but his eyebrows twitch ominously. Then comes the moment that sparks the riot. A servant, sweating profusely, accidentally drops a tray of venison pie. It lands with a splat, upends half a bowl of mulled cider, and douses the hem of Lady Maven's gown. Dead silence. Then she throws her goblet, not at the servant, but at Lord Osric. She misses by a league, but it hits the harpist's stand, and the lute lets out a miserable twang that sounds suspiciously like a scream. One of the hounds jumps onto the table, chasing a turkey leg. Someone shouts, "The pigs are loose!" They are. The bastard heir vanishes under a table, either for cover or for comedic timing. You duck just in time to avoid a bowl of mashed peas flying through the AI. So this is how it goes. A feast meant to celebrate the harvest ends in curses, bruises, and at least 3 separate duels arranged for dawn. You nibble your trench of bread, now soggy with mead, and watch as someone attempts to calm a goose with a ladle. Welcome to 13th century diplomacy. You spend the night in a borrowed hayloft, your original bedchamber having been claimed by Lady Maven's sobbing niece, who swears she's developed a goose allergy mid-banquet. The straw pokes through your cloak, your boots stay on, and the sound of pigs in the corridor below reminds you that luxury is relative, by morning. The feast hall smells of boiled onions and regret. You trudge downstairs half expecting to see the hall empty, but no, the servants are still at it. Someone is scraping parsnip paste off the tapestry. Someone else is combing a wig out of the gravy bowl. And in the center of it all, a cook stands surrounded by broken crockery, yelling about broth. This is where you learn the real reason last night's stew tasted like shame. There were 3 head cooks. 3. All of them appointed by Lord Osric for different reasons. One for being his cousin, one for being good with herbs, and one because he once served soup to the Archbishop of York without inducing vomiting. These culinary titans were meant to work together on the feast centerpiece, a traditional barley and root stew with a kiss of cured mutton. The only thing it kissed was disaster. The problem began with the herbs. Cook 1 believed dill was essential. Cook 2 insisted dill was the work of devilish tongues. Cook 3 was indifferent, but added garlic behind their backs to make a point. Then came the stock debate. Bones or brine? Chicken or calf? Neither, said Cook 2, who poured wine directly into the pot while laughing. And just when things were beginning to simmer, Cook 1 declared the broth too thin and began to thicken it with barley flour. Cook 2 countered by adding water. Cook 3, sensing a culinary standoff, tried to unify the profile by dumping in raisins, which everyone knows is a food truce's death knell. That stew never had a chance. By the time the servants arrived to ladle it into silver bowls, it had the consistency of wet parchment and the color of doubt. No 2 spoonfuls tasted alike. Your bowl last night may have contained cloves, onions, lamb, and possibly a button. Historians still argue whether medieval feasts relied more on show or flavor. Recipes from the time are vague at best. One simply says, take meat, cook it well, add what pleases God. Not very Michelin-starred. What's clear is that multiple cooks in a single kitchen was a disaster waiting to boil over. And boil over it did. You pass the trio now, still squabbling beside the hearth. One of them holds up a ladle like a sword. Another is waving a leek like a banner. The third is sulking and muttering about raisins being misunderstood. The servants step around them politely. You take your seat on a wobbly bench near the far table, reserved for the guests who neither fought nor cried. A fresh pot of barley gruel is set before you, safe, simple, bland. You are grateful. Then Lord Osric appears again, hair slightly burnt at the fringe, likely from last night's candle mishap. He raises a cup in weary defiance. To breakfast, he says, as if commanding the room to forget the previous evening, and no one does. The minstrels begin to tune up, only to discover their instruments are filled with breadcrumbs and something that smells like herring. One lute string snaps in protest. The new dish served is described as egg tart, but arrives as egg suggestion. It's mostly crust with aspirations of poultry. Still, it's better than the stew. Your table companion from last night, a minor lord who spent the second course under a bench pretending to be asleep, leans toward you conspiratorially. Did you hear? He whispers. The broth incident wasn't even the worst? You raise an eyebrow. They forgot the salt entirely, used powdered chalk instead, said it added texture. You suddenly understand why your tongue still feels. Scraped. A page boy enters, holding the ruined stew pot like an urn. Shall I return it to the fire? He asks, to no one in particular. No, replies all 3 cooks in perfect unison. We bury it. The page nods solemnly. The burial happens in the garden behind the keep. There's no ceremony, just a shallow pit and one muttered prayer from a cook who might actually be crying. You watch from the shadows, sipping warm ale. The pot is lowered. The earth is replaced. Parsley sprig is stuck in the soil. For memory, you think maybe it's what the stew would have wanted. You've barely digested the morning's chalk-enhanced gruel when another summons arrives, written on what appears to be the back of a mutton receipt. It bears Lord Osric's seal, the faint smell of dried rosemary, and a command. Attend the lakeside pavilion at noon. Dress accordingly. You dress accordingly. Which means brushing straw from your sleeves and hoping your left boot, still damp from the broth burial ceremony, doesn't squelch too loudly. The path to the lake is lined with reed lanterns and hopeful banners that flap with the limp enthusiasm of yesterday's trout. Speaking of which, when you reach the pavilion, the scent hits you first. Fish, but not the good kind. Not the ocean-kissed kind that glistens on a platter like a jewel. No, this is fish that has seen things. Fish that has journeyed from river to market to mistake. The table is set for peace. Not metaphorically. The actual purpose of this midday meal is a diplomatic summit between Lord Osric and his neighbor, Baron Gautier of Stonemarsh. Their lands have been feuding for months over something called the cow boundary incident. And now, over trout, they will make amends. You are there to witness it. The centerpiece of the feast? A symbolic fish, supposedly caught fresh that morning from Glenmuir's own stream. It rests on a bed of greens, head intact, eyes accusatory. Its tail curls up slightly, as if trying to flee. Lord Osric sits at the head of the table, face tense, hands folded. Baron Gautier arrives draped in fur, despite the weather, and eyes the trout as if it owes him rent. The herald announces, "A dish of unity," with such strained cheer that the fish seems to twitch in protest. You and the other guests murmur approval. A servant cuts the fish. The first slice releases a smell that makes 3 people gasp and 1 person curse under their breath. Someone drops a goblet. The wind shifts. You brace yourself. Baron Gautier lifts his fork, spears a bite, chews, swallows, and stops moving silence. Then, gently, he sets his fork down. "You mock me," he says softly. Lord Osric blinks. "It's a trout," he replies, as if that explains everything. It's an insult wrapped in scales. Gautier counters, "At this point, you should know, historians still argue whether the trout was actually spoiled, or if it was simply undercooked, as some 13th century dishes were meant to be soft in the middle. Others claim the trout wasn't local at all, but imported and mishandled. Whatever the truth, Gautier stands up. "I crossed 3 fords and an awkward hill to get here. I endured Osric's oat beer. I tolerated the lute solo. And now, I am offered rotten fish." The wind carries the smell across the pavilion like a diplomatic slap. Lord Osric rises too. "It was caught at dawn. A dawn last week, perhaps," mutters Gautier. You scoot your stool back slightly. Then Osric gestures to the servant. "Bring the backup fish." A murmur spreads. There was a backup fish? The servant bolts, returns minutes later holding a dish covered with cloth. It's lifted with dramatic flair, revealing a pike. Fried whole, but unmistakably stuffed with something that is not herbs. Gautier leans in. "Is that plum?" "It's a regional twist," says Osric, sweat beading. "On what region?" Gautier snaps. You decide not to try etiquette in a last-ditch effort at reconciliation. Osric reaches for the peace treaty, a literal scroll on the table's center, and hands it to Gautier. "We sign now. Forget the trout." But Gautier, instead, takes the scroll, dunks it in his wine, and uses it to flick a piece of plum pike onto the grass. That's when it happens. A dog, hitherto unnoticed under the table, lunges for the fish. Gautier flinches. His fur cape gets caught in the bench. He stumbles, grabs the tablecloth, and pulls the entire peace offering into his lap, including the trout. You've never seen so many nobles pretend not to laugh. The summit dissolves. Gautier mounts his horse backward, unclear if deliberate, and gallops off muttering about revenge and salted vengeance. Osric sits, takes a sip of wine. "Well," he says, "we tried." You nod. Later, as you help scrape trout flakes off a velvet chair, a steward sighs beside you. "Should have served chicken." The day is barely half over, and already you've witnessed a treaty fall apart over fermented trout and plum-stuffed pike. Your stomach is unsettled, not quite from what you ate but more from what you smelled, and the wind carries a damp chill that makes your tunic cling unpleasantly. You don't even make it back to the keep before the next culinary crisis arrives. It starts with a trumpet blast from the orchard terrace, where the second course of the day, yes, second, is being prepared as a private tasting for honored guests. Lord Osric, perhaps to regain prestige after the trout debacle, is unveiling his most extravagant gamble yet. A dish spiced with more saffron than has ever been assembled in one place north of Venice. You are invited. You suspect this is less because of your social rank and more because the usual testers are still ill from last week's fig and figwort surprise. The saffron dish, called Golden Victory Porridge, is brought out in a bowl that requires 2 servants and what appears to be a pulley system. It glows like a sunbeam on a foggy day. The aroma is intoxicating: honey, cloves, a hint of something floral. It is beautiful. It is possibly cursed. The steward leans toward the crowd of invited guests, all of whom are eyeing the bowl with admiration and alarm. Imported spice, he whispers, hand-carried by pilgrims from Acre. You murmur along with the others, though you're fairly certain it smells a lot like the potpourri your aunt once used to keep rats out of her cabbage bin. A spoon is dipped. The consistency is somewhere between rice pudding and ambition. The first bite is yours. It tastes expensive. Historians still argue whether medieval nobles used spice in food to enhance flavor or flaunt power. Some chronicles record saffron being measured not by weight, but by the width of the merchant's grin. In any case, Golden Victory Porridge is not meant to be subtle. You take a second bite and feel your eyebrows raise involuntarily. The saffron doesn't just dominate, it invades. It stages a siege on your taste buds. The honey tries to balance it, but only succeeds in making the dish taste like dessert arguing with soup. Lady Maven is next. She takes one bite and declares, "This tastes like my wedding," which is either high praise or a warning. No one asks. Sir Aldred, more dramatic, drops his spoon and says, "This is what dying tastes like if your last words were 'make it more golden.'" Still, the bowl circulates. Everyone is careful to compliment Lord Osric, who watches from a silk-draped chair, nodding solemnly as though overseeing an exorcism. But here's the thing about saffron. It's not just rare. It's ruinously expensive. Each guest's spoonful has more gold threads than a bishop's vestment. The sheer cost of the bowl, whispers say, could feed 3 villages for a year, or at least provide those villages with far less aggressive porridge. You overhear the steward whisper to a servant, "Tell the clerk to revise the treasury scrolls." Again. And then the real tragedy unfolds. A boy, barefoot, presumably a kitchen helper, sprints into the terrace with a message scroll clutched in one hand and a desperate expression on his face. "Sir," he yells, waving the parchment, "we've received word from the saffron supplier." Osric's brow furrows. "Speak." The boy swallows hard. The second shipment was counterfeit. Dyed straw, mixed with crushed calendula petals. A gasp. Lady Maven drops her goblet. Sir Aldred spits his porridge into a hedge. A nearby minstrel faints, possibly from drama or from drinking the saffron-infused wine. Osric looks down at his bowl, now lukewarm and doubly cursed. "So you're saying," he growls, "that I've just served a false porridge of lies?" "Bright lies." The steward offers helpfully. A long silence. Then Osric groans, tilts his bowl, and pours the remains into a flower pot. The marigolds recoil. You and the rest of the guests slowly back away, some clutching their stomachs, others mourning the lost opportunity for social climbing through spice. Someone mutters, "At least the trout was honest." That night, word spreads that the feast has entered its 3rd phase. Simplified rustic fare. Everyone pretends to be thrilled. "Nothing wrong with root vegetables," one knight says, while carving a radish into the shape of his own disappointment. You, for your part, return to your seat in the main hall where simple stews now simmer. You opt for a bowl of lentils seasoned only with salt and low expectations. It's the best thing you've eaten in days. A cook leans near and whispers, "The saffron porridge cost more than the keep's roof repair." You look up at the crumbling ceiling. A drip lands in your bowl. You nod. That tracks. By now, your senses have been through a gauntlet: mismatched spices, questionable seafood, and a lingering scent of wet saffron clinging to your sleeves. But the evening isn't done with you yet. Not by a long shot. You return to the great hall just as the torches are being relit, casting soft amber halos on the stone walls. The long tables have been reset, the floors hastily swept of trout scales and plum pulp, and somewhere, Someone is whistling a song that sounds suspiciously like a funeral march for porridge, and now comes the moment no one is ready for. The pie, you're told it's a tradition. An ancient spectacle dish known in certain parts of Normandy as pastilla mirabile, or the marvelous pie. Its purpose is simple. Astonish your guests. Sometimes it's filled with fruit, sometimes roast game. Sometimes, as in this case, it contains a surprise. You probably see where this is going. The servants bring it in on a wooden cart. The pie is enormous. Not merely grand, but structurally suspicious. Its golden brown crust gleams with egg wash and ambition, and its shape is slightly lopsided, as though whatever is inside shifted at the last moment. Two servants stand by with carving knives. A third lifts a trumpet to his lips and gives a noble toot that sounds like a goose being stepped on. Lord Osric rises from his bench, arms wide. "Behold," he bellows, "the wonder of the Glenmere feast, a marvel to delight the eye and entertain the noble soul." The servants nod. Then, very carefully, one pierces the top crust. Nothing happens. The second begins slicing downward. The crust gives way, buttery and warm. There's a pause, then a rustle, and then chaos. A flurry of feathers erupts from the pie. Not metaphorical feathers. Not a clever garnish. No real, living birds. Historians still argue about the species. Some say sparrows, others claim finches. One source insists particularly violent starlings. Whatever they were not happy. The hall erupts in screams and flailing limbs as 10, maybe 20 furious birds explode out of the pie like a judgment from above. One swoops low over Sir Aldred's head, stealing the feather from his hat. Another dive bombs the harpist, who takes cover behind a stew pot. You duck under the table just in time to avoid a direct beak-to-face encounter. This, you realize, is why there were air holes in the crust. A footman grabs a chair and waves it overhead like he's trying to direct traffic in a thunderstorm. Lord Osric claps once, tentatively, and says, "It's performance poultry." No one claps back. Lady Maven stands frozen as a bird lands on her shoulder. Squawks. She blinks. Then she mutters, "I liked the trout better," and excuses herself. By the time the birds are rounded up, or at least chased outside, the pie is ruined. Not just decoratively, structurally. Its contents, minced chicken, dates, eggs, and what appears to be raw onions, have been rendered unrecognizable by the frantic exit of its winged guests. The steward whispers that the pie was meant to contain just 2 doves, very calm. But apparently the kitchen confused the cages. The doves were released at the pre-feast blessing, he adds sheepishly. We used the backup birds. You look over at one servant bandaging his ear. Backup birds. The phrase alone is enough to unsettle your stomach. Eventually, the remains of the pie are removed. A new dish is promised, something less dramatic. A cabbage tart, someone says. You nod. Cabbage doesn't fly. Usually. To lighten the mood, Lord Osric calls for music. The minstrels reappear, some still twitching. One has replaced his missing lute string with thread from his own sleeve. Their song is hesitant, but soothing. The guests settle back into their seats. A servant brings you a cup of mead. It's warm, not too sweet, and miraculously bird-free. You sip. Outside, you hear the sound of flapping wings retreating into the trees at a moment of peace. Then, from across the table, someone murmurs, "Next year, let's just do stew." You raise your cup in quiet solidarity. Just when you think the evening might finally settle into a rhythm, birdless, brothless, and blessedly beige. A ripple of discontent bubbles up from the minstrel's bench. They're not playing that they were. Briefly, the tune had a nice lilt to it, something about a goat and a lady who sold vinegar. But halfway through the second verse, the strings stopped. The pipes fell silent. And the entire group, the harper, the drummer, the man whose only job appears to be hitting 2 stones together with gusto, have gone on strike. The reason? Dinner. Or rather, the conspicuous lack of it. You see, in a medieval feast hierarchy, minstrels hover somewhere between essential ambience and afterthought with rhythm. They're expected to perform before, during, and after every course, and in return, they receive the musician's portion. Tonight, that portion was boiled oats. You know this because the drummer holds up a wooden bowl as evidence and shakes it like a maraca of disappointment. "Where's our pheasant?" the harper cries, standing atop a bench. "Where's our venison pasty? We were promised at least a boiled egg per chorus." One of the nobles mutters something about artistic types. But the situation is clearly escalating. Lord Osric tries diplomacy. "Surely the oats were well seasoned?" he asks. The drummer hurls a sprig of rosemary at him. It hits the floor with a tragic flop. Historians still argue whether minstrels had written contracts for feast performances, or whether their pay was purely based on vibes. Some say they were richly rewarded with gold, furs, and applause. Others insist they were fed crusts and expected to juggle if conversation lagged. What's certain tonight is that these minstrels are done being background noise. They stage what can only be described as the world's earliest musical labor strike. They fold their arms. The harper glares at a nearby scribe. The drummer turns his bowl upside down and places it on his head like a helmet. You, of course, are caught in the middle. The hall falls into an awkward silence. Someone clears their throat. Someone else attempts to hum. A knight begins clapping in rhythm, alone, and is quickly silenced with a stale bun. Then, as if conjured by tension itself, the steward arrives with a large covered dish. He lifts the lid with theatrical flourish to reveal 2 small roast hens, that's at .2.46 musicians. The harper gasps. The drummer removes the oat helmet. The stone guy drops his stones in awe. It's not a peace offering. It's a provocation, and it backfires. The harper declares a ballad of betrayal on the spot, sings 2 verses about dry oats, and then collapses dramatically into the lap of a duchess. The audience claps. The duchess applauds louder. Lord Osric sighs. He gestures for the minstrels to be removed, gently, and replaced by a local storyteller known for her animal impressions. This is received with cautious optimism. You lean back, sip your mead, and reflect. So far, you've seen a fish feud, a spice bankruptcy, a bird pie disaster, and now, a musical mutiny over oatmeal. It's barely twilight. The storyteller clears her throat. She begins a tale about a fox who impersonated a monk to sneak into a vineyard. Her donkey impression is uncanny. People laugh. The air lightens. You feel, for the first time in hours, slightly relaxed. Then the drummer returns. He somehow found a real drum. He begins tapping softly, at first, then faster, louder. The foxtail is drowned out by a rhythmic protest beat. The nobles look confused. The storyteller tries to continue, but now the stone guy is clapping along, and someone's banging pewter mugs. The feast hall devolves into percussive chaos. Lord Osric stands, raises his hands, and declares, "Enough!" Silence falls. He looks around. He looks tired. He points at you. Yes, you, and says, "You. Tell a story." You freeze. You have no story. But you do have a half-eaten oatcake and a vivid memory of flying birds. You stand slowly. The hall watches you begin. Once, in a land not far from this one, a noble tried to impress his guests with a magical pie. They laugh. You keep going as you tell it. The birds gain hats, the stew develops sentience, and the minstrel's bowl becomes a crown. It's not history, but it feels true, and just like that, you're the entertainment now. The oatcake crumbles in your palm, warm and reassuring. Your voice echoes against the high stone arches, and for a fleeting moment, everything is quiet. Your impromptu tale earns you a place of dubious honor. A stool right beside the storyteller's platform, with a direct view of the now fuming drummer, who has taken to tapping his boots together in protest. You try to ignore him. After all, you've survived bird explosions and saffron deception. A passive-aggressive percussionist is practically relaxing. But the feast marches on. As twilight deepens and torchlight flickers against the stone walls, a new course is announced with great fanfare. A servant strides into the room holding a goblet aloft, not filled with wine, but with a glossy, deep crimson concoction sloshing gently as he walks. "Behold," the steward calls, "the ceremonial wine of Glenmere." The hall cheers politely, some out of genuine enthusiasm, others out of a shared fear of what might be floating in it. The goblet is passed to Lord Osric, who sniffs it with reverence. fermented with rose hips, clove, and a whisper of elderberry, he declares. Let it circle the table. May it gladden the tongue and fortify the soul. You've never trusted anything that whispers in a drink. Still, the goblet makes its way around. Guests take careful sips. Nods of approval ripple through the room. Even Lady Maven, whose last expression was somewhere between betrayal and gas pain, smiles faintly. Then Sir Aldred takes his turn that he drinks deep, and then he begins to speak in tongues. Well, not actual tongues, but certainly not his tongue. The words tumble from his mouth in a language no one recognizes. Part Latin, part frog, part something that sounds like he's trying to curse a teapot. Gasps echo around the hall. Someone mutters, "He's been enchanted." Someone else, more practical, whispers, "It's the wine." You lean forward, listening. His tone is solemn, dramatic. Every syllable rings out as though it carries the weight of prophecy, or indigestion. Sir Aldred finishes his recitation and slams the goblet onto the table, and then begins reciting again. Backwards, historians still argue whether certain medieval wines contained natural hallucinogens, or if additives like mandrake or belladonna were ever slipped in during feasts. Most claim such stories are exaggerated, legends grown fat with time and ale. But tonight, your table believes. Lord Osric, determined to maintain order, steps forward. It's a performance, he says. A theatrical piece. A poetic moment. Sir Aldred burps mid-incantation. A very poetic moment. Osric insists. The goblet is quickly confiscated. The remaining wine is poured into a chamber pot for safekeeping, which is promptly locked in a cupboard by two guards who smell of cinnamon and fear. Sir Aldred, to his credit, eventually returns to normal, after being read to by the storyteller and fed a calming loaf of barley bread. He's now resting with his head in a pie crust. The hall pretends not to notice, with the wine debacle momentarily diffused. Lord Osric claps his hands. Onward, he declares, to the next delight. A small roasted pheasant is brought out, perched daintily on a wooden board, flanked by candied onions and what appears to be edible gold flakes. The crowd oohs and ahs. You brace for something to go wrong. And right on cue, it does. The bird is carved open to reveal stuffing. Not unusual, but not just any stuffing. Inside the pheasant are rolled parchments, scrolls. Tiny, greasy scrolls that you're not sure if this is food, performance art, or a clerical error. Lady Maven delicately retrieves a scroll with the tips of her knife. She unrolls it, clears her throat. A poem, she announces, addressed to the moon of my kidney. The room falls deathly silent that Osric's steward rushes forward, cheeks aflame. There's been a mix-up, he hisses. Those were meant for the love feast next month. Love feast? Let us never speak of this again, Osric mutters, eyes darting toward the minstrel bench, where someone is trying not to giggle. The rest of the pheasant is discreetly removed, and the edible gold is quietly swept into a pouch by a resourceful page. You sit back and exhale. This, you remind yourself, is a nobleman's feast, the peak of culture, a triumph of planning. Somewhere, in the rafters, a bird from the pie lets out a lone, disapproving squawk. You close your eyes. Maybe you're dreaming. Maybe the wine did whisper to you. But when you open your eyes again, you're still in the same hall. Same torchlight. Same slight whiff of saffron and parsnip. And the next course is being announced in a voice that sounds suspiciously excited. Custard duel! Someone cries. You are suddenly, deeply tired. The custard duel begins with an absurd amount of ceremony. Trumpets blare, though one of them emits a distinctly sad honk due to a custard-related clog from last year's feast. Two heralds in matching doublets march into the hall bearing silver trays. On each tray, a bowl of custard. Glossy, trembling, innocent-looking custard. They set them down gently on a side table draped in linen. A hush falls. Lord Osric rises from his seat with all the gravitas of a monarch about to mediate a border dispute. Ladies and gentles of Glenmere, he declares, in honor of the great dessert traditions of our realm, we resume a time-honored custom, the custard duel of honor. You immediately regret staying seated so close to the front. Beside him stand the duelists. Two young cousins of questionable nobility and unquestionable ego, Sir Edric the Younger and Lady Alice of Bramblemere. Apparently, a dispute over land boundaries and a questionable interpretation of a hedge map has led to this moment. The rules are recited. 1 bowl of custard per duelist. Each must hurl their serving at the other from a distance of 5 paces. If one dodges, they forfeit. If both hit, a rematch is called. If neither hits, the custard is consumed as penance. It's completely ridiculous. And the hall is thrilled. You, however, remain cautious. You remember the birds. The heralds pace out 5 steps on the rush-covered stone floor. Sir Edric rolls his shoulders like he's preparing for combat. Lady Alice stretches her arms, which are suspiciously muscular for a debutante. The audience leans in. Someone places a bet. Someone else whispers, "I heard she trains with a trebuchet." A servant counts down, 3, 2, 1. Custards fly. Sir Edric's bowl sails wide, arcs majestically through the air, and splatters against a wall tapestry depicting St. Hildegard calming a storm. The result looks like divine intervention failed spectacularly. Lady Alice's custard flies true. It strikes Edric dead in the chest. Yellow cream explodes across his velvet tunic. He gasps, not from pain, but from the sheer existential indignity of being felled by pudding. The hall erupts into applause. Alice bows, retrieves a spoon from her sleeve, and samples a bit of custard from Edric's tunic. "Could have used more nutmeg," she says, to raucous laughter. Historians still argue whether food duels ever occurred outside poetic satire. Some records mention noblemen challenging each other to jelly tilts or flan contests, but most scholars agree such events were theatrical, symbolic, or the result of too much spiced wine. Tonight, it's very real that a second duel is proposed between 2 visiting monks over the rightful origin of a plum tart recipe. Osric, perhaps fearing escalating dessert violence, quietly declines. "Let's not spill more custard than we can justify," he says. The custard bowls are cleared away. A pageboy scrapes remains off the saintly tapestry. It now looks like St. Hildegard survived the storm but lost a fight with a bakery. You glance around the hall. Spirits are high again. It's hard to believe this is the same gathering that just hours earlier was mourning a trout treaty and questioning the psychological properties of wine. You're beginning to understand medieval feasts were less about food and more about events. The meal is a stage. The guests are actors. The custard? Just props in a very messy play. As the laughter dies down, Osric raises his goblet. To Lady Alice, undefeated in dessert combat. The room cheers. Sir Edric bows stiffly, custard still dripping from his collar. A new dish is brought out. Honeyed root vegetables sculpted into vague animal shapes. Someone beside you pokes a radish hedgehog and mutters, "That looks too smug." You try one. It tastes like earth and sugar and something that might once have been a parsnip. And for the first time in hours, you think, this isn't so bad. Then someone sneezes, not an ordinary sneeze, a high-pitched, herb-infused explosion of particles that immediately sends a nearby knight into a coughing fit. A server stumbles, drops a tray, and yes, more custard hits the floor. You stare into the flickering torchlight, wondering whether you're still inside the custard duel, or if the entire feast has simply become one large, rolling absurdity. Probably both. Lord Osric, unbothered, signals for music. The minstrel's refuse. Instead, the storyteller returns. She begins a tale about a duck who tricked a bishop by impersonating a loaf of bread. You don't even question it anymore. You sip your watered wine, pat a smear of custard from your boot, and lean back. At this point, you duel someone for a nap. You're not sure how long the duck story goes on. It's either 20 minutes or the better part of a week. But eventually, the hall stirs again, just as you've reached that delightful days between wakefulness and oat-induced coma. A servant leans over your shoulder and whispers something that would chill the marrow of any guest at this point in the evening. Fresh bread is being served. Now, ordinarily, this would be cause for celebration. Who doesn't like a warm loaf at the end of a long night filled with spice confusion and poultry-based performance art? But here's the thing: you've heard rumors about Lord Osric's bread. Not the rye rolls or oatcakes, those are perfectly fine. No, the trouble lies in what the staff are now dramatically wheeling into the center of the hall on a platter the size of a rowing boat. the grand sourdough of Glenmere, a round, glossy, dome-like bread, large enough to serve as a modest dwelling for a child. Shiny from what appears to be multiple layers of egg wash and ego. The moment the loaf is unveiled, there's an audible groan from one of the kitchen staff. Another crosses themselves. You lean toward the guest beside you, a minor baroness from some fog-drenched island. She whispers, "Last year, 3 people cracked teeth. One knight claimed the crust insulted his lineage. The knife required to slice it is no ordinary blade. It's forged from what looks like a repurposed sword. 2 cooks must hold the loaf steady while a third hacks at it with slow, exaggerated strokes. The crust groans under the pressure like an old door contemplating retirement. Finally, a piece is extracted. It's about the size of your hand and roughly as dense as a training mace. It's passed to you on a wooden plate that visibly bows under the weight. You hesitate. Then, with the cautious optimism of someone who's survived pie birds and wine curses, you take a bite. Crunch. Not crusty crunch. Not crispy. This is the crunch of geology. Your jaw protests. Your molars demand legal counsel. The inside is marginally softer. If by soft, one means slightly less hostile. There's a vague sour tang, as if the bread itself regrets existing. Historians still argue whether medieval sourdoughs were intentionally hard for preservation, or simply the result of ambitious neglect. Some claim noble loaves were baked over days, to demonstrate both wealth and the ability to break a tooth at will. Others say Osric's bread is uniquely cursed. You're starting to believe the latter. Around the hall, others attempt the bread with mixed results. One elderly knight uses his dagger to shave bits off like sandstone. Another guest simply soaks their slice in ale until it resembles a sponge. The baroness beside you breaks off a piece, sniffs it, then feeds it to her lapdog, who licks it twice and falls asleep. Lord Osric, unaware, or perhaps entirely aware, stands and claps once. "Let it be known," he announces, "that Glenmere's loaf endures, as all noble things must." You nod slowly. Endurance, after all, is what tonight has been about. The loaf is passed down the table. At one point, someone drops a piece. It lands with a thud so heavy it startles the remaining birds in the rafters. But there is one silver lining to the grand sourdough of Glenmere, that a sliver of butter, someone, blessed, anonymous, kind, has left small pots of fresh butter on the table. And you, seizing the opportunity, slather your slice with as much as it can hold. The butter softens the edge, dulls the regret, and briefly you taste something, edible victory, perhaps, and yet, as always, disaster is waiting just beneath the crust. Lady Maven, seated 2 tables down, attempts to slice her loaf with a ceremonial dagger. The dagger snaps in half. A shard flies into the nearest candelabrum. Hot wax rains down. A scream, a crash, and suddenly the corner of the hall is ablaze with confusion. A servant leaps forward with a jug of ale, douses the flame, and inadvertently soaks 3 guests. One of them is Lord Osric's cousin, who now smells like sour hops and singed velvet. The feast pauses. Osric stands. "Let us all be grateful," he says, "for bread that challenges us." You close your eyes. You're not even mad anymore. You're just impressed as the loaf is retired, placed reverently back on its silver tray like a relic too powerful to consume. The guests resume quieter, more cautious nibbling. The storyteller picks up where she left off. The duck has now acquired a false beard and joined a monastery. You don't even blink. The drummer taps his spoon on a bowl rhythmically. It might be rebellion or just chewing accompaniment. You finish your last bite of bread, now soaked in both butter and survival instinct. Somehow it tastes better. You think you've made it. You really do. After the bread ordeal, after the custard war, after the cursed wine and angry pie birds, the feast seems to enter a lull. The hall dims. The torches burn lower, flickering like tired eyes. Even Lord Osric has slumped slightly in his chair, gazing wistfully at his goblet like it might offer some insight into where the evening went wrong. You're about to excuse yourself and seek refuge, possibly under a bench, when you hear something that chills you more than any breeze off the moat. At a voice near the high table announces, "Bring in the king's supper." The room falls silent. You glance around. King? No one here has mentioned a royal guest. And yet, into the room comes a procession of servants. 4 of them carry an enormous tray draped in embroidered velvet. On top of it rests a silver platter, adorned with garlands, golden cutlery, and, at the center, a roast duck glazed to perfection, surrounded by what appears to be poached pears, candied sage, and small, worryingly decorative mushrooms. It's beautiful. It's also untouched. The tray is placed with exaggerated care at a small, vacant table set for one. A cushion waits on the chair. A goblet has already been filled. A place of honor, empty. You turn to your neighbor, whispering, "Who's this for?" She looks at you strangely. "The king, of course." "King who?" A servant hushes you. "You'll wake him." The steward steps forward. "My lords, ladies, and honored guests, as is tradition, a feast within a feast shall be offered to our former sovereign. Tonight we honor King Alric the Unyielding. Long may he feast." This would be touching were it not for the fact that King Alric, by all accounts, has been dead for 7 years. Apparently, this is not the first time his supper has been served. You blink. A few guests bow solemnly toward the empty chair. Someone coughs. Someone else whispers, "It's bad luck not to serve him." And so the meal begins. No one sits at the table. No one touches the food. The duck cools by the minute, the pears sweat gently, and the mushrooms stare blankly back at you. The air grows colder. You are not a superstitious person, or at least you weren't until the custard duel. But something about this ritual gnaws at the edge of your reason. It's not just eerie, it's oddly reverent, as if everyone here wants to believe he might show up. Just one more time. Historians still argue about ghost feasts in medieval custom. Some say they were common in northern courts, offered on anniversaries of deaths or to ward off ancestral displeasure. Others believe they were theatrical gestures meant to display piety, legacy, or, in Glenmuir's case, to quietly remind the guests that this hall once hosted royalty. But when you look at the duck, still steaming ever so slightly, it's hard not to imagine the chair pulling back. A spectral hand reaching for the goblet. Lord Osric stands beside the table now. He raises his cup. To Alric, who once held this hall with wisdom, with strength, a pause. And with an exceptional appetite, a nervous chuckle from the back. Then the storyteller steps forward, as if summoned by unseen script, and recites a brief tale of Alric's last feast. "He ordered 12 courses, but only touched 3, she says. He said, 'The first is for hunger, the second for joy, the third for memory.'" The hall nods. The duck grows colder. No one eats. You sit in stillness, hands folded, mouth dry. A dog, one of the same hounds that chased the pie birds, sniffs at the ghost king's chair. A servant gently pulls him back. Eventually, the steward clears his throat. The duck is removed, carefully, reverently. The cushion is fluffed. The goblet, still half full, is left alone. You think the moment has passed. But then, just as the servers turn to go, a breeze rolls through the hall. Not a draft. A breeze soft, sure, strangely centered. The candles flicker inward, not out. A pear rolls from the platter onto the empty chair, rests gently against the cushion, and stops. Everyone sees it. No one moves. Then Osric exhales. He liked pears. The hall breaks into cautious applause. You clap, too, though you're not entirely sure why. The moment is over, but something lingers. You drink deeply from your cup, let the mead wash away the chill crawling along your spine. And you think, next time, maybe just send him a card. The ghost of King Alric may, or may not, have joined the party. No one says it out loud. But after the mysterious breeze and the perfectly timed pear roll, the energy in the feast hall has changed. Just a little quieter. Just a little more careful. People chew with slightly more reverence. Even the drummer, still brooding near the wall, is tapping with a tempo that could only be described as respectful, which makes it all the more unfortunate that the next incident involves fire, and ale, and soup, all at once. You are just settling back into your seat with what might be your 5th mead of the evening, or possibly your 6th. Time has become increasingly theoretical, when a commotion rises from the kitchen corridor. At first, it's just clattering pots. Then shouts. Then smoke. Thick, rolling, onion-scented smoke. A door bangs open, and a cook barrels into the hall, wielding a ladle like a weapon and covered head to toe in soot and panic. "It's the hearth," he cries. "The hearth betrayed us." Behind him, a trail of scorched rushes smolders softly. Two servants sprint in with damp cloaks, trying to stamp out the embers. A dog joins them, joyfully misunderstanding the chaos as a game. In his mouth, a roasted carrot, possibly on fire. Lord Osric doesn't rise. He merely sighs. You, meanwhile, back slowly away from the soup station. Yes, there's a soup station. Or at least, there was. Apparently, in an effort to revitalize the peasant classics, tonight's late-night course was meant to be a three-pot celebration of humble stews: leek and barley, beef and turnip, and something called mystery pot. Historians still argue whether mystery pot was a legitimate dish or a catch-all term for leftovers that didn't fit anywhere else. Tonight, it's a bit of both. Unfortunately, someone placed the iron cauldrons too close to the hearth. One of them boiled over, into the fire. Then came the ale. Barrel stored, aged, and stacked precariously above the hearth to keep it warm. You see where this is going. As the soup splashed into the flames, it triggered a sputtering hiss. And then, a loud pop as one of the ale barrels cracked open from the heat, sending frothy foam cascading down like a waterfall made entirely of shame. Ale met fire, fire met soup, and what followed was, by all accounts, a stewy explosion, nothing deadly. No need for pitchforks or priestly intervention. Just a slow-motion spectacle of barley broth flinging itself into the air, where it mingled with the scent of roast garlic and charred oak before landing in ladles, laps, and, tragically, a bishop's hat. The bishop in question, Heron you believe, holds the dripping mitre at arm's length and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like a blessing and a threat in the same breath. Supshire, someone whispers. You can't tell who said it, but you hear snorting nearby. Cleanup begins immediately. A line of servants armed with cloths, pails, and something called ash vinegar descend upon the soup zone with grim determination. You retreat toward the far wall, cup in hand, watching it all unfold like a live-action morality play titled Don't Boil Ale. One brave guest, possibly unaware, possibly heroic, retrieves a ladleful of surviving soup from the corner pot and takes a taste. He nods. Still warm, he says, then sneezes 3 times in rapid succession. Lord Osric finally stands. Let this be a reminder, he declares, that even the humblest meal contains volatility. A weak cheer follows. And then, perhaps to distract from the carnage, a juggler appears. Where he came from, no one knows. He's holding 3 pears, 1 candied turnip, and, dear heavens, a small bowl of broth. The crowd gasps. He juggles. It's mesmerizing. The turnip arcs. The pears spin. The bowl flips end over end and, miraculously, nothing spills. The bishop claps. The dog barks. You smile for the first time in what feels like an era. Historians may argue about the specifics of medieval cuisine, but one thing's clear: they never lack drama. And tonight, Glenmere Keep has served you fish feuds, spice crimes, custard warfare, ghost diplomacy, and now a fire soup ale incident you'll be trying to explain for decades. As the juggler bows and the audience breaks into cheers, you raise your cup once more. To whatever comes next, you whisper. Then something squishes under your boot. You look down. It's a turnip. Of course it is. You scrape the mashed turnip from the heel of your boot with a piece of broken pewter and vow never to trust root vegetables again. But the feast has no mercy. Not 5 minutes after the soup fiasco, the steward, unfazed, possibly unfeeling, announces the next course with that same, unearned confidence that only a man wearing wine-soaked hose can muster. Pudding! You brace yourself. Because in Glenmere, pudding isn't a dessert. It's an event. Tonight's offering is a family recipe, passed down through 7 generations, most of whom, legend claims, lost teeth in the process. It's called Black Moon Custard, a thick, dark, spiced creation served chilled, and in portions roughly the size of a closed fist. It arrives in silver bowls so dented they look like they've seen battle. And they have. You learn this as the bowls are passed down the table. Two cousins, young, red-cheeked, with matching embroidered tunics and matching smugness, begin arguing over which of them gets the larger scoop. At first, it's harmless teasing. A spoon tap here, a sarcastic toast there. Then one reaches for the other's bowl, and the duel begins. It's not announced. It doesn't require trumpets. No herald steps in to explain the pudding code. No, it simply erupts with a spoon to the elbow and a retaliatory flick of custard to the eye. Guest's turn. Spoons are lifted. Bets are whispered. Lord Osric sighs into his napkin. Not again. Because, as you're told by a nearby lady with 6 rings and 0 eyebrows, this isn't the first time Black Moon Custard has started a fight. Last year, she says, they dueled with ladles. This year's version is Messier. The cousins rise, circling one another like knights, except instead of armor, they're draped in napkins, and instead of swords, they wield dessert. One flings custard with impressive accuracy, landing a glob squarely on the other's chin. The crowd gasps. Someone shouts, "For the honor of Bramblemere!" You duck instinctively. A spoonful sails overhead and lands with a wet plop in the remaining stew pot. No one notices, or maybe no one dares address it. Historians still argue about the seriousness of pudding duels in medieval banquets. Some accounts describe them as ritualized dessert showdowns meant to entertain the court. Others insist they were simply the byproduct of too much mead and not enough boundaries. Either way, you're witnessing one now, and it's escalating. The steward tries to intervene, only to take a hit to the shoulder and retreat behind a banner depicting St. Dunstan and his miraculous eel. The juggler attempts to help by tossing a spoon to one of the cousins but accidentally hits Lady Maven's goblet instead, sending wine across her lap for the 3rd time tonight. She does not take it well. She stands. The room quiets. She picks up a full bowl of Black Moon Custard. The crowd holds its breath. Then, with the poise of a noblewoman and the fury of a storm cloud, she launches it across the table. It hits Sir Aldred square in the chest. Again, you're beginning to suspect the universe has it out for him. There is a moment of stunned silence. Then applause. The duel dissolves into laughter and scattered spoon flinging. Servants rush to clean up the splattered pudding. One quietly mutters that they're switching to apples for next year's festival. You dab a bit of custard from your sleeve and dare a taste. It's oddly delicious. Rich, spiced, a hint of clove. Worth the duel? No. Worth watching one? Absolutely. The storyteller rises once again, this time with no introduction, just a weary smile, and begins to recite a poem about 2 knights who tried to settle a property dispute using only syrup and moral superiority. You sip what's left of your mead and marvel at how the knight keeps finding new ways to entertain and confuse. There's talk of cheese next. You pray it doesn't come with weapons. You know the cheese is coming. You feel it in your bones, in the air, in the vaguely brie-scented breeze wafting from the side corridor where the servers have vanished. And judging by the way Lord Osric perks up in his chair, back straight, hands clasped, eyes gleaming with the fervor of a man who's been waiting all night, this is not just any cheese. It is the singing cheese. You heard whispers earlier, but thought they were metaphors. Surely no one expects cheese to sing. And yet, here you are. The steward clears his throat. As is custom, he announces, we now present the Glenmere Harmony Wheel. Aged 5 years beneath the chapel, rotated by moonlight, and accompanied daily by the choir of the Blessed Snail. You can't tell if he's joking. You don't ask. 2 servants roll in an enormous wheel of cheese the size of a wine barrel, engraved with what looks suspiciously like tiny musical notations burned into the rind. They place it upon a carved pedestal, reverently remove a velvet covering, and then, wait. Nothing happens. A 3rd servant rushes forward, holding a small silver tuning fork. He taps it once, softly. The cheese vibrates. A hum, low and almost imperceptible, begins to rise. The hall goes completely silent. You lean forward, and then, clear as a bell, faint but unmistakable, the cheese sings, sort of. It's more of a warble, honestly, like a lute string underwater. But it holds a tone, and that's enough to send 3 guests into tears and another into a giggle fit. The steward, face shining with pride, declares, it is believed that the cheese harmonizes with those it has bonded with. You may approach and hear your note. You blink. You absolutely will not be bonding with dairy tonight. But others do. A line forms. Guests step forward, press their ears close to the rind, and gasp, sigh, or in one case, propose marriage to the cheese, not a fellow guest. It's unclear if they were serious. Historians still argue over the legend of singing cheeses. Some say it originated from aged wheels cracking in cold storage, producing accidental whistles. Others insist it was an elaborate prank passed off as mystical resonance. A few even point to early experiments in fermentation acoustics, a field that, thankfully, never fully developed. Back in the hall, the cheese is growing louder. Or rather, the room is growing quieter, and the faint humming seems to press against your eardrums like a polite but persistent inquiry. You step up for your turn, you lean in, and yes, it hums at you. Not a melody, just a warm, buzzing tone. The kind of sound you imagine a sleepy bee might make after sipping mulled cider. You step back, unsure whether to feel enlightened or lactose intolerant. Lady Maven listens and faints. A servant catches her. Another writes down the cheese's tone on a scrap of parchment for future reference. Then Sir Aldred steps up. You watch with trepidation. Surely he's due for a win. He leans close. The cheese cracks. Not just a little. A thunderous snap echoes through the hall as a hairline fracture shoots through the top rind like lightning through snow. There is a moment of stunned horror, and then the cheese wheezes. A soft, strained sound. Half tone, half squeak. It sounds like a duck sighing in a library. Sir Aldred stumbles back. The hall bursts into laughter. Osric, red-faced from suppressed glee, claps once. It sings no more, he declares. It has spoken. The wheel is wheeled out, softly whimpering, slices are passed out. Sharp, tangy, oddly musky. You taste yours cautiously. Not bad, not great, not musical, but solid. You imagine it pairs well with regret that a bard composes a limerick on the spot. There once was a cheese that could sing, that hummed like a lute on a string, but one noble chap made it go snap. Now it wheezes through every spring. Sir Aldred drinks deeply from his goblet and doesn't comment. Why now? The tables are sticky with crumbs, smudged with custard, glistening with half-remembered ambition. The feast rolls forward like a cart with one square wheel. No one seems to know how much longer it will last. No one wants to be the first to leave. Because anything could happen next. You glance toward the steward, who is whispering with two servers while pointing at the ceiling. You follow his gaze. Are those ropes? Oh no. Oh yes. Something is being lowered. It's moving. But that's for later. For now, you eat your slice of broken cheese. It squeaks slightly as your knife presses down. You don't question it. The ropes creak. You freeze mid-bite, knife poised halfway through your squeaky cheese, as a large box-like shape descends slowly from the rafters. It swings gently, side to side, casting long, uncertain shadows across the tables below. Everyone stares. The storyteller stops mid-sentence, eyes wide. The minstrels, still technically on strike, look up as one. Even Lord Osric cranes his neck, as if he too forgot this part of the itinerary. The box lands softly with a muffled thud. Two servants rush in to untie the ropes. A puff of hay escapes from beneath the cloth covering its top. Then, with a flourish, the steward steps forward and whips the cloth away. Inside the box is a boar. Or rather, what used to be a boar. It's been roasted. Thoroughly, lovingly, maybe even aggressively. The snout is polished with honey. Apples, 6 of them, form a crown around its head. One is stuffed in its mouth in the classic fashion, though it seems to be slipping out, as if the boar is slowly giving up. The skin glistens. The aroma wafts across the hall like a warm, savory promise. Finally, something that smells like actual food. And then the whispering starts. You catch phrases drifting around you. They didn't cook it long enough. It was stored too close to the trout. I heard it twitched when they basted it. You look more closely. The boar shimmers, not in a good way. There's a shine to it that suggests too much glaze or not enough sense. The juices pooling at the base of the box are the wrong color. Somewhere between amber and anticipation. One brave soul, Sir Aldred, because of course, steps forward to carve the first slice. He digs in with a ceremonial blade, makes one cut, and steam hisses out. Not the rich, fragrant steam of a perfectly cooked roast. No, this steam smells underdone, possibly vengeful. You see three guests simultaneously lean back. One covers their nose. Lady Maven, somehow now on her third outfit of the evening, reaches into her sleeve and produces a sprig of dried lavender to wave protectively under her nose. Sir Aldred, chewing dutifully, chews once more, then stops. What is it? Osric calls. A long pause. Then, I believe it's an experience. Historians still argue over medieval roasting techniques. A whole boar, even by 13th century standards, was a culinary flex, a symbol of wealth, power, and patience. Unfortunately, Glenmuir's boar seems to be lacking at least one of those. The steward steps in. Our apologies. The roast is, shall we say, rare. Someone else whispers, practically medieval sushi. Slices are handed out cautiously. Yours arrives looking pinker than expected, flecked with something that might be sage or regret. You try a tiny nibble. It's wet, not juicy. Wet. You look down and see your reflection in the glaze, and yet, the feast must go on. To mask the crisis. The minstrels, now somewhat mollified by bread and mead, begin to play a soft tune. It's a waltz, but played on instruments that were clearly never meant to waltz. The harpist strums in 3/4 time, while the flutist plays something vaguely martial. The effect is unsettling. Osric, perhaps sensing the mood teetering, stands and claps 3 times. Bring out the pageant, he cries. The pageant? Of course there's a pageant. The side doors open. A procession of children in animal costumes emerges, led by a goat, an actual goat, draped in purple velvet. Behind it comes a donkey, also real, also velvet draped. Following them are small squires holding painted shields and banners bearing the Glenmuir crest, which appears to be a duck riding a turnip. You've stopped questioning things. The children begin to act out something that seems loosely based on the history of Glenmuir Keep. There's a battle. There's a misunderstanding involving a cow and a bishop. At one point, the goat refuses to leave the dais and eats part of the script. Osric claps enthusiastically. The audience, too full or too confused to care, joins in. Meanwhile, the boar continues to glisten ominously. You glance around and notice that most guests have quietly pushed their portions to the edge of their trenchers. A dog now sits beneath your bench, hopeful eyes fixed on your plate. You pass him the rest. He sniffs, then licks once, and decides against it. Smart dog. The pageant concludes with the children singing something that might be a hymn, or might be a nursery rhyme about gooseberries and vengeance. Either way, the goat harmonizes. Everyone applauds. Osric stands, arms wide. Let it be known, he declares, that Glenmuir's spirit, like our roast, cannot be fully tamed. You sip from your cup. You wonder if that was supposed to be comforting. Then, as the children are led away and the goat is bribed off stage with stale custard, a servant begins clearing the boar. He lifts the tray, tilts it ever so slightly, and one of the apples rolls off. It lands with a soft thud in your lap. You look at it. You look at your neighbor. You eat the apple. It's the best thing you've had all night. The apple, crisp and perfectly tart, lingers on your tongue like a secret. It's the first thing tonight that doesn't fight back, doesn't steam, hiss, wobble, or whisper ominously. It's just an apple. You savor every bite. And then, as if summoned by the gods of misplaced ambition, a herald steps forward and proclaims, "Peasant cuisine!" A silence follows, heavy and suspicious. Peasant cuisine. You glance around. A few nobles frown. Others shift in their seats. Someone mutters, "Didn't we already survive turnips?" A steward nods enthusiastically and rushes back toward the kitchen with a grin that says, "You haven't seen anything yet." Moments later, the doors swing open and in comes the humble course. Large platters are brought forth, piled high with rustic delights. Boiled barley, stewed cabbage, mashed beans, something that might be beetroot and might be a mistake. There's also a suspicious gray lump labeled heritage gruel. Osric claps his hands like a man who's never eaten peasant food, but has commissioned 5 tapestries about it. This, he announces, is how our ancestors feasted in the fields, with vigor, with simplicity, with this. He gestures toward the mashed beans. No one applauds. The first bowl is placed before Lady Maven, who, to her credit, lifts her spoon and takes a delicate bite she chews. She blinks. She swallows. Then, softly, she says, "Is this revenge?" You stifle a laugh. So does Sir Aldred, whose own plate of gruel has begun to develop a crust. Despite being served moments ago, you poke at your portion. It jiggles slightly. Still, you've learned your lesson. You try everything once. The cabbage is edible. The barley is chewy. The gruel is philosophical. It tastes like it's trying to teach you a lesson about humility, and you're not sure you're ready for it. Historians still debate the accuracy of peasant-themed courses at noble banquets. Some argue it was a show of solidarity, meant to honor the working class. Others believe it was a culinary dare disguised as social commentary. At Glenmere, it seems to be both, and neither. Beside you, a guest nudges a beet with her spoon. "It's staring at me," she whispers, and then the beets fight back. Not literally, not quite. But as more guests begin to eat, a soft murmur spreads through the room. The dishes are aggressively earthy. A noblewoman nearby begins fanning herself. A young page bites into a barley cake and drops it immediately, claiming it bit him first. One gentleman stands up, loudly declares that the lentils have turned, and flees the hall. You nibble a bean and immediately regret it salvage the situation. Osric proposes a toast. "To the land," he cries, raising his goblet. "To toil, to tradition, to indoor plumbing," someone mutters. The toast is met with a tepid cheer and a rapid return to wine goblets. To this point, the dog who refused the undercooked boar has returned. He sits by your bench, watching your bowl of gruel with growing alarm. When you offer him a bit on the end of your spoon, he sniffs, sneezes, and walks away. Even the goat from the earlier pageant declines a stray beat. That's when you know things have gone too far to distract from the peasant course's growing pile of uneaten shame. The storyteller launches into a tale about a village so poor they ate nothing but turnip skins, and so clever they invented 4 dozen ways to pretend they hadn't. The tale includes turnip skin porridge, turnip skin stew with imaginary goose, and not turnip bread, which contains absolutely no bread and mostly hopiates, the funniest thing you've heard all night. The guests roar. Even Osric laughs, though you suspect he doesn't realize he's being lightly roasted along with the barley as the story ends. The steward mercifully clears away the remaining peasant dishes. The gruel makes a wet slurp noise as it's lifted, which prompts at least 3 people to excuse themselves and go check on the garden. Osric, recovering, raises his goblet once more. "Now," he says, "we've eaten as kings and commoners. We've dined in the shadow of memory and the light of pudding. And soon, we shall taste glory." You're not sure what that means, but you've got a sneaking suspicion that whatever's coming next won't be edible either. You're not sure what taste glory means, but judging by the wide grin stretching across Osric's face and the sudden reappearance of 3 stewards carrying a tower of wheels and wedges, you suspect you're about to find out that it's cheese. All of it at a tower of cheese 7 tiers tall, tilting slightly to the left, bound together with dried fig twine and garnished, because of course, with marzipan violets. A golden flag perches at the summit, emblazoned with the Glenmere crest. A duck riding a turnip. Again. The steward beams. The 7 cheese tower of truce. You blink. Named in honor of the historic peace between Glenmere and Stonemarsh, he explains. Though the peace only lasted 3 weeks and ended when someone stole a chicken. The guests clap politely. The cheese tower is magnificent, admittedly, at least in concept. The base is a firm, yellow cheddar style will known as hammer cheese. Above that, soft sheep's milk, Avena blue, a suspiciously gooey triple creme, something green, something smoky, and finally, at the very top, a round of waxy mystery crowned with a single olive. You think back to the goat. You think back to the bird pie. You really should know better by now. Lady Maven leans across the table. "You know," she says, "I once saw a man lose consciousness from blue cheese fumes. You nod solemnly. Did he recover? Oh no. But he said it was a beautiful dream. Cutting begins. Slowly, reverently, the cheeses are sliced and distributed. The bottom tier is safe, familiar, pleasant. You chew with cautious optimism. Then you get the second layer. Creamy, aromatic, slightly tangy, then slightly too tangy. Then, is that a burning sensation? By the third layer, your mouth is a battlefield. The blue is aggressive. It enters your sinuses like a philosophy major on debate night. The guest beside you sneezes twice and cries a little. And then the goat faints. It's not dramatic. It just slowly folds and lies down. The room falls silent. A physician is summoned. He waves some parsley under the goat's nose and declares it emotionally overwhelmed. You continue upward. The green cheese is next. It tastes faintly of garlic, nettle, and fear. No one is sure what animal the milk came from, but guesses include sheep, goat, and a very sad cow. Then comes the smoky layer. Someone coughs. Someone else says it reminds them of their uncle's chimney. You get halfway through your slice and find a sliver of something chewy. A raisin? A fig? A warning? Historians still argue whether medieval cheese towers were actually consumed or merely admired. Some records suggest they were decorative symbols of prosperity. Others say guests were expected to eat from them to prove their bravery. Tonight, it's a dare disguised as tradition. And then, the final layer, the waxy mystery. You watch as the top tier is carefully cut. A wedge is placed before you, quivering slightly. The olive rolls off and lands in your lap. You don't return it. You lift your fork. You take a bite. It's indescribable. Not because it lacks flavor. Quite the opposite. It has too many flavors. Sweet, salty, sour, smoky. It tastes like a parade marching through a spice market during a thunderstorm. It tastes like guilt. It tastes like something that should have been buried. Not served. Sir Aldred bites his piece and goes very still. Then, quietly, he whispers, "The cheese has secrets." You nod. Your tongue tingles. The storyteller, perhaps sensing the moment, begins humming a soft dirge. The minstrels, reunited and slightly tipsy, join in with a slow, sorrowful tune. And that's when it happens. The tower shifts, just a little at first, then a little more, then, slowly, inevitably, with the grace of a slumbering bear, it begins to collapse. It's not a crash. It's a slide, a slouch, a weary, melted lean as the top tiers give in to gravity and hubris. The guests gasp. A few leap backward. A child cheers. Cheeses tumble like boulders. The blue splatters across the floor. The smoky layer rolls under the dessert table. The waxy wedge lands, miraculously, back on your plate. The tower is gone. The goat, now revived, simply stares. Osric stands. "Truce," he says, raising his goblet. "Was always temporary." The guests cheer. And for the first time all evening, you laugh. Freely, loudly. The cheese tower is gone. The goat has forgiven everyone. And the olive, still warm from your lap, is passed to the juggler, who balances it on his nose and takes a bow. You lean back in your chair, full of absurdity and cheese, and exhale. Only 14 more courses to go. The cheese has defeated its tower. The tower has defeated the tablecloth. And you, belly full and mind teetering somewhere between mild nausea and giddy delirium, begin to suspect that time has ceased to function inside Glenmere Hall. Outside, the moon is rising. Inside, dessert is arriving. The steward, inexplicably chipper, announces the final grand flourish of the evening with such flourish that a nearby candelabrum tips slightly. A servant catches it. No one seems surprised. The flourish, candied everything. Plates spill onto the table, each heaped with a chaotic rainbow of preserved fruits, spiced nuts, candied rose petals, crystallized mint leaves, glazed pears, syrup-drenched quince, and something called orange-jellied pigeons. You sincerely hope that's metaphorical. It is not. You poke the pigeon-shaped jelly with your spoon. It wobbles ominously. Apparently, Lord Osric has a weakness for all things candied. You hear from a neighboring guest, Countess Ivra, who wears a hat shaped like a boat, that his kitchens have a dedicated sugar artisan. A full-grown man whose entire job is to boil syrup, pour it into molds shaped like woodland creatures, and pray they cool evenly. One such creature is placed before you. A sugar fox, mid-pounce, fangs bared. It's technically edible. It's also hard enough to chip a stone wall. Someone takes a bite. Someone else loses a tooth. You stick with the glazed pear. Sticky, but kind. Soft. Merciful. The table chatters excitedly. After so much chaos, the sweets are a comfort, even if half of them are more sculptural than digestible. There's a tray of almond dragons, a tiny sugar village complete with icing peasants, and a surprisingly lifelike marzipan bishop. Bishop Heron eyes it with open suspicion. "He's smirking at me," he mutters. Historians still debate whether 13th century sugarcraft was meant more for show than consumption. Given the hardness of your sugar fox, you lean toward show, or perhaps as a self-defense tool. These are not the confections of idle nibbling. These are architectural marvels, possibly usable as siege weapons. But they are pretty. Candles flicker off spun sugar towers. One child is gently scolded for licking the marzipan cathedral. Another guest is currently engaged in a slow, serious duel with a sugar swan, attempting to bite off the beak without breaking the neck. It's a losing battle. Then someone gets a brilliant idea. A spoon taps a glass. The hall quiets. "Contest," declares Lady Maven, eyes glittering with madness and sweet wine. "Whoever builds the tallest candied structure from their plate wins." Osric nods. "Yes, let the tower of sweets commence." Plates are cleared. New trays arrive, gingerbread tiles, sugar paste mortar, licorice beams, wafer scaffolding. The hall explodes with energy. This isn't just dessert now. It's competitive architecture. You're assigned a partner. A stoic young squire who doesn't speak but communicates through eyebrow twitches and an alarming command of caramel engineering. Together, you begin assembling what you dub the Temple of Toothache. It is, miraculously, not terrible. Across the room, teams hustle. Sir Aldred attempts a candied keep, but his sugar drawbridge melts. The bishop refuses to participate, citing ecclesiastical sugar laws. The drummer constructs a licorice trebuchet and promptly catapults a jelly bean into Osric's goblet. It's a direct hit. Laughter rolls through the hall. Your Temple of Toothache reaches 3 tiers before collapsing inward in an elegant spiral, like a delicious, syrupy ruin. You cheer anyway. The squire raises a licorice beam in silent salute. Lady Maven wins with a spire of candied violets so tall and spindly that guests must duck to avoid impalement. She accepts her victory with a curtsy and eats the top tier as a flex. You, sweaty with sugar dust, sit back and assess the wreckage. The table is chaos. Sticky, sparkling chaos. Icing on sleeves. Glaze on foreheads. A crystallized pear now fused to the tablecloth. The dog is licking a dropped marzipan knight with reverence, and Lord Osric? He stands arms wide, face glowing with triumph and possibly syrup. "Let it be known," he declares, "that Glenmere feasts end not with a sigh, but with a crunch." He bites into a sugar sword. It shatters in his hand. He waves the hilt like a victor. Applause erupts. The storyteller rises once more and begins a tale about a dessert so sweet it lured bees from 10 miles away and convinced a baron to wed a baker's apprentice. You close your eyes, your hands are sticky, your teeth ache, your heart, somehow, is full, and you think, what strange, sweet madness this has all been. You try to wipe your hands on your napkin, but it's already crusted with a layer of icing, syrup, and the slow, fossilizing memory of 10 different desserts. So you do what any reasonable person would do at this stage of the feast. You give up. Sticky-fingered, sugar-dazed, and laughing softly to yourself, you lean back against the bench and sigh. You've survived fish wars, custard duels, cheese calamities, and a towering confectionery competition. Surely, nothing else could go wrong. And then someone shouts, "Release the dancers!" You don't know who says it. Possibly the minstrels. Possibly the storyteller. Possibly the goat. But within seconds, the hall is rearranged. Tables are shoved to the sides. Candles are relit with a theatrical flourish, and an awkward sort of clearing emerges in the middle of the room. Bare floor strewn with dropped sweets and the odd feather from the pie incident that no one's dared to clean up yet. A flute begins to play soft at first, then louder, warbling with questionable commitment to key. A drum joins in. A single dancer steps into the clearing, spinning, arms aloft, cloaked in silk and a hat with bells. You expect a performance. You get a challenge. Because this, apparently, is not just a dance. It is a circle of honor. Lord Osric claps and shouts, "Join the circle! Dance the tale of the feast." The what now? You are shoved forward, gently, but with intent, by a child dressed like a sugar plum who clearly means business. Other guests are being herded into the makeshift dance space as well. Nobles, servants, a confused page holding a pear tart, and the goat, who has decided to participate fully. Someone hands you a ribbon. You don't know why, and then it begins. The music swells. The first movement is the March of the Barley Stew. You and the others stomp awkwardly in time, mimicking ladling motions with your arms. A few guests actually slosh imaginary stew from imaginary pots with alarming realism. Then, the bird pie escape. You flap, you squawk. You pretend to burst from a pastry shell while maintaining eye contact with the minstrel playing the lute, who looks like he's regretting all his life choices. Then, saffron catastrophe. Everyone fans themselves and staggers in circles while miming financial ruin. Someone faints into the arms of a knight. Someone else throws fake coins into the air. The goat spins. It is magnificent. You are sweating, but you are committed. The music shifts again. Custard duel waltz. Half the circle splits off into dueling pairs. You are assigned Lady Maven, who hands you an imaginary bowl of pudding and immediately tries to hit you with it. You duck. You retaliate. She pretends to trip and goes down dramatically. The crowd applauds. Next, turnip despair. You all slowly crouch and mime digging for turnips while emitting low, mournful groans. A noblewoman next to you starts crying real tears. You don't ask why this point. Your limbs are jelly. Your forehead glistens with a mixture of marzipan oil and existential confusion. The music slows. The final movement begins. Cheese Tower Elegy. Everyone lifts invisible wedges into the air. You sway gently, imagining the blue crumbles, the smoky discs, the waxy silence of that final olive. The melody grows soft, sweet. A high flute note lingers like a sigh, and then, one by one, you all sit. The hall erupts in laughter and clapping. Lord Osric stands, claps thrice, and wipes away an actual tear. That, he says, was the finest retelling of a meal I have ever witnessed. The goat receives a garland of sugared mint. The drummer salutes you with a ladle. Historians will likely never agree whether medieval nobles truly danced out their feasts. But in this moment, with icing in your boots and ribbon in your hair, you believe it's possible that a servant passes by, offering warm wine laced with cinnamon and plum. You accept. You drink. Your muscles ache. Your spirit soars. You look around the room, now softened by candlelight and glazed contentment. Guests lean against one another, their laughter quieter now. The food has faded. The disasters have dimmed. All that remains is memory, motion, and a floor still faintly sticky from custard. The storyteller steps forward with one final line. The feast, she says, is not what you eat, but what you survive. You raise your cup in quiet salute. And finally, you rest. You think it's over. You hope it's over. But Glenmere, like any good tale or overambitious banquet, has one final surprise tucked beneath a napkin, wrapped in linen, and kept mysteriously cool in a wine cellar no one remembers stocking. The room has calmed now. Guests recline. A few snore. The goat has curled up beside the fireplace, gently chewing on what might be a piece of licorice architecture. Even Lord Osric looks ready to declare the night a success and retreat to whatever gilded chamber he stores his regrets in. Then the steward clears his throat, once, twice, and says, "There is one last course." A low groan ripples across the hall, the kind of collective moan usually reserved for battlefield injury or tax season. Osric blinks. There is. The steward nods solemnly. The ice. You sit up. Did he say ice? There is no ice. It's the 13th century. Even in Glenmuir's drafty embrace, the idea of ice being part of a banquet sounds absurd, impossible, potentially magical. And so, naturally, everyone stirs, intrigued. The side doors open. Two servants shuffle forward, carrying what looks like a small wooden chest nestled in a wagon lined with straw, salt, and desperation. The chest is opened with great care. Inside, snow cream. At least, that's what the steward calls it. Made from the mountain snows of Wintermere, he says. Mixed with milk, honey, and chilled wine syrup, a delicacy brought down in clay jars and buried in salt until this very moment. You stare at the white, slushy mass, faintly steaming in the torchlight like it's not entirely convinced it wants to exist. They begin to serve. Tiny bowls. No spoons. Just carved wooden paddles, more fit for mini fencing matches than dessert. You receive yours with trembling fingers. You take a bite, and every nerve ending in your mouth wakes up. Cold, sweet, sharp with fermented fruit. The texture is grainy, like eating snow that went to finishing school. It melts fast, vanishing before you've fully processed it, leaving behind only a chill that moves through your jaw and down your spine. Your teeth vibrate in confusion. It's divine and terrifying. You glance around. Guests are murmuring, smiling, trembling slightly. Lady Maven drops hers on the floor and immediately demands a second bowl. Sir Aldred eats his too fast and begins hiccuping in iambic pentameter. The bishop takes one bite and crosses himself. The dog refuses to try it. The goat, for once, does not ask. This dessert, historians claim, was rare, extremely rare in the Middle Ages. Transporting snow was a logistical nightmare. Even with clay jars, salt insulation, and the tears of desperate kitchen staff. Only the most stubborn or deeply misguided noble houses would attempt it. Tonight, Glenmuir proves its place among them. A third bowl is brought to you without asking. You try to decline. The servant smiles. His lordship insists. You eat it. It tastes like frozen guilt and childhood wonder. The hall grows quiet again, but this time in a reverent way. Everyone eats slowly, softly, like pilgrims nibbling relics. The only sound is the faint clink of wooden paddles and the occasional gasp as cold hits molars. Then, one final performance. A young girl, perhaps 8, steps into the center of the room. She carries a tiny bell and begins to sing a lullaby, low, clear, haunting. The words are old, maybe Latin, maybe nonsense. You don't care. It wraps around you like warmth, despite the cold in your chest. The guests still. The goat sighs. Even Osric closes his eyes. And in this moment, this tiny, ridiculous, wonderful moment, you realize something. The feast wasn't about the food. It was about the trying. About the absurd glory of ambition. The joy of mistakes. The delight in a pudding duel and a ghost king's dinner. About music and minstrels and cheese towers that collapse in your heart. The girl's song ends. The hall is silent. Then Osric whispers, "We begin again next year." You believe him. The song ends, and the final spoon of snow cream melts into memory. The hush holds over Glenmuir Hall, delicate and reluctant to break. You feel it in the softened posture of the guests, in the crackling hearth now down to embers, and in the way the minstrels sit with their instruments not quite packed, as if waiting to be asked for just one more tune. But even medieval absurdity must bow to exhaustion. The servants move slowly now, gathering trenchers, refolding napkins that surrendered hours ago, lifting half-eaten pigeon jellies and gingerbread casualties from the sugar tower. The air smells like a baker's dream and a winemaker's overpromise. You glance at Lord Osric. He looks like a man who has climbed a mountain made of custard, turned around, and now sees the valley of sleep waiting below. There's a glaze in his eyes that is equal parts triumph and treacle. And yet, he rises one last time. "My friends," he begins, his voice a touch hoarse from wine, cheer, and several near-death cheese incidents. "You have dined bravely." The room chuckles. "You have survived dishes most nobles dare not name. You've danced the stew. You've outlasted the turnip." Polite applause. And you've shown that in Glenmere, a feast is not a meal, it is a saga. Someone toasts with a spoon. And as is tradition, he continues, we end not with food but with fire. Fire? You sit up straighter. The storyteller steps forward, now holding a long taper candle. One by one, guests are given similar tapers, each lit from a central flame placed atop a honey-glazed candelabra shaped like, yes, a duck on a turnip. You are handed a candle. The lights dimmed, and a servant rings a soft bell. Then, from the far side of the hall, two cloaked figures enter, pushing a small wheeled structure covered in vines and moss. It's a fire altar, the steward whispers. Crafted of clay and thyme wood, sealed with beeswax, used once a year to mark the feast's end. Atop it sits a ceramic bowl filled with dried herbs, orange peels, slivers of pine, and bits of old menu scrolls. Osric steps forward, touches his candle to the pile that it catches. Not with a roar, but with a whisper, soft smoke, fragrant and curling, rises into the beams above. Add your flame, Osric says. Point one by one, guests approach. You follow, holding your taper with both hands like a relic. You step forward. You touch it to the bowl. The flame glows brighter, dancing. The scent changes, now clove, now myrrh, now something like pine cones in December and burnt almonds in spring. The room is silent. Even the goat. Historians have rarely recorded fire rituals to close feasts, but there are whispers of similar traditions. Symbolic burnings of excess, prayers for better harvests, or just ways to tell the night it can go home now. As the last candle is added, the flame peaks and then settles, warm and steady. Osric speaks once more. May the memories of this night burn longer than the pudding. May our laughter outlast the soup. May our roof. He glances up at a suspiciously stained patch in the ceiling. Hold at least until spring. Everyone laughs. Then silence again. The goat sneezes. You take that as your cue to rise. People begin to drift away, slow and murmuring. A nobleman hums the custard duel waltz. The juggler juggles a spoon, a candied chestnut, and one of his own regrets. The minstrels strike a soft chord as guests collect cloaks, shoes, dignity. You find your way to the outer hall, passing a servant holding a tray of mint leaves and towels soaked in rosewater. You take one. It's warm. You wipe your hands. Your face. Your memory. As you exit into the chill of night, you turn back for a final glance. Glenmere Hall glows behind you, torches flickering, shadows long and lovely. The doors slowly shut. And the silence is full of everything. The night air outside Glenmere Hall wraps around you like a soft wool cloak. Cool. Just damp enough to remind you that morning is still a rumor. And quiet in that rich, thoughtful way only deep countryside can be. The kind of quiet that invites reflection or regret over third helpings of sugar-roasted turnips. You walk slowly. Not because you're trying to be poetic, but because you physically can't move any faster after 8 hours of feast-related combat. You hear others behind you, guests murmuring farewells, laughing softly, sighing as they step onto the gravel paths that lead to chambers, stables, and in one case, a cart shaped like a swan. Someone hums the dance of the barley stew under their breath. Someone else still clutches a souvenir candied beet. You wonder what happens to all the leftovers. A servant passes you, carrying what looks like an entire loaf of untouched gruel. He pauses, lifts the lid of a small wooden box labeled for the pigs, and dumps it in with reverence. You respect that. You turn toward the guest wing. Rooms prepared in advance, each stuffed with rushes, firewood, and probably half-melted sugar foxes from feasts past. You reach your chamber. Inside, a low fire burns, and a cup of something warm has been left on the table. You don't question it. You sit. You remove your shoes. One of them still holds a crumb from the heritage cheese. You do not mourn its loss. As you sip, spiced cider, blessedly calm. You glance out the narrow window. The stars hang bright over Glenmere's towers, and you swear the moon looks amused. You remember the pageant goat, the custard duels, the singing cheese, the ghost king's dinner. You remember the snow cream and the look in Sir Aldred's eyes when the blue cheese hit him like a truth bomb from the dairy realm. You remember laughing, and somehow you feel better than you have in a long time. Because the truth is, Tonight wasn't just about excess or spectacle. It was about connection. Each disaster drew people closer. Every pudding thrown, every pie exploded, every flaming soup mishap wove the guests together tighter than any court protocol ever could. You weren't just a guest. You were part of the legend now. You finish your drink and lie back on the straw-stuffed mattress. The fire crackles. Your limbs ache in a good, earned way. The scent of herbs and melted sugar clings faintly to your sleeves, and just before you close your eyes, you hear a sound in the corridor. Not footsteps. Not voices. A soft, sleepy squeak. You sit up slightly. It's the goat, wearing a blanket, carrying what looks like a chunk of leftover pudding in its mouth. It pauses at your open door, considers you, then walks inside and curls up beside the hearth. You smile. Fine, you whisper, but no snoring. The goat does not respond. You close your eyes. The warmth of the fire, the softness of the night, and the memory of a feast too ridiculous to be real settle around you like a lullaby. Outside, Glenmere sleeps, and you dream of pears, dancing cheese, and custard champions. The goat snores, softly, like a bellows exhaling into a velvet cushion. You don't mind. In fact, it feels oddly right, like the final punctuation mark on a sentence written entirely in pudding, cheese, and mild chaos. You lie there for a while, not quite asleep but no longer awake, staring at the flickering firelight painting gentle shadows across the ceiling beams. Each flicker dances like a memory from the night. The fall of the cheese tower, the twirl of the stew dance, the precise moment Sir Aldred's custard duel turned existential. And then, because Glenmere cannot leave anything simple, a bell rings. A small one, distant, but unmistakable. You groan. The goat opens one eye and then promptly returns to sleep. You rise, slowly, unwillingly, and peek out your chamber door. Others are doing the same, faces bleary, expressions somewhere between curiosity and digestive regret. In the great hall, the steward waits, somehow still upright, still smiling. Final right? He says. Final? There's more? The guests shuffle in, slippered and yawning, forming a loose circle around a stone basin filled with cool, rose-scented water. Floating in it, small ribbons of parchment point one by one. People step forward, pluck a ribbon, and read it aloud. Each one bears a message, some silly, some cryptic, some oddly profound. You wait your turn. Lady Maven goes first. Her ribbon reads, "Beware goats bearing gifts." She bows. Sir Aldred reads his, "Next time, duck." He chuckles, probably remembering the pie birds. Your turn comes. You reach in. Your fingers brush parchment. You draw one out. It reads, "Every feast is a story. Every story, a feast." You smile. Historians never mention this part. Perhaps it was too small, too personal. A ritual whispered rather than shouted. But here, in this moment, it feels like the quiet heartbeat of everything Glenmere stands for. After reading, each guest folds their ribbon and tucks it into the hearth fire. You do the same. The flames rise briefly, flicker with purpose, then settle back into soft embers. It's not about destroying the memory. It's about warming it, sealing it into smoke and ashen air. The steward bows. "Now," he says, "you may rest." You return to your chamber, this time certain there will be no more surprises. The goat is gone, probably off to visit another guest, spread a little bleeding goodwill. You nestle under your blanket, still vaguely sweet-scented from the candied violet battle, and close your eyes. This time, the dreams come fast. You are in a field of sugar violets. A castle looms nearby, made entirely of bread. A harp plays somewhere, softly, and then changes key, becoming a duck's honk. A custard duel breaks out between two very serious onions. You laugh in your sleep. Back in Glenmere Hall, the servants finish tidying. The flames die down. The storyteller hums herself to sleep with a tune older than the mortar in the stones. And over it all, hanging on the wall, is the banner of the feast. A duck, triumphant, still riding that turnip, forever tilting toward absurdity. Morning tiptoes into Glenmere the way a cat might enter a room full of sleeping dogs. Quiet, cautious, and slightly amused, you stir beneath your blanket, blinking slowly, body still sore from laughter and half-remembered waltzes. The scent of rosewater lingers in the room, mixed now with fresh bread, beeswax polish, and the faint musk of a goat who probably shouldn't have had that much custard. You sit up. Your tunic is wrinkled. Your shoes are missing. One of your socks is somehow stuffed with sugared almonds. You do not question this. Outside your chamber, the world is stirring, too. Servants move silently, carrying trays of spiced cider and baskets of warm scones. You hear quiet greetings, the jingle of keys, a dog barking somewhere in the courtyard, a lute string being tuned badly, but with intention. You shuffle down the corridor, joining the slow procession of guests headed back to the hall. Except now it's not the hall. There's something softer, quieter. The great wooden doors are wide open. The long tables are bare. The floor has been swept clean of all but the most determined crumbs. Light pours through the windows, golden and soft. Breakfast at Glenmere is not a feast. It is a gentle apology and no processions. No declarations. Just simple foods. Warm oat cakes, soft cheese, poached pears, boiled eggs in little ceramic cups. Real butter. Real coffee if the rumors are true. Someone mutters about chicory. But no one cares. You find a seat at one of the smaller tables. Across from you, Lady Maven, hair braided now, wearing something that resembles peace. She raises her cup. Still alive? She asks. Barely, you reply. Sir Aldred stumbles in, still wearing a ribbon sash from last night's pudding duel. He sits too quickly, winces, and immediately begins buttering toast like it owes him money. The storyteller enters next, yawning and carrying a small book. She flips through it idly, then places it in the center of the table. The title, scrawled in ink, Feast Log. Guests are invited to add their memories. You hesitate, then take the quill. You write, the cheese sang, the goat danced, I survived. Lady Maven writes simply, I won the custard duel. Don't forget. Sir Aldred, if anyone sees my left boot, please return it. It has sentimental cheese inside. Outside the window, birds sing. The garden glows with morning dew. The Glenmere kitchens are quiet now, probably licking their wounds and boiling down yesterday's disasters into next year's sauces. Historians might dismiss this part. They'll write about the Great Hall, the roasted boar, the songs and pageantry. But they'll skip this, the quiet, the calm, the shared weariness that binds strangers into something almost like kin. And yet, here's where the magic is. In the soft clink of cups, the hush of warm bread breaking, the shared smiles over the ridiculous memory of singing dairy and explosive stew. Lord Osric arrives last. He's still regal, still rumpled. He holds a piece of toast in one hand and a scroll in the other. We begin planning the next feast, he says. In 3 months. Groans all around, then laughter. You pour yourself another cup of cider and lean back, letting the sunlight find your face. You've survived Glenmere, you've dined with ghosts, you've danced stew. And this sleepy, quiet, healing hour may just be the best part of all. With your cider half drunk and your chair now perfectly molded to your form from several hours of enthusiastic feasting and napping, you find yourself thinking about legacy. Not the grand kind. No epic poems will be sung about the cheese tower, although now that you think about it, the minstrel did take notes. No monuments will rise in honor of Sir Aldred's pudding injury. But the quiet legacy, the stories passed along, whispered and retold, stretched like dough until they become both history and legend. That kind lingers. The Feast of Glenmere is one such tale, and you are now part of it. Across the room, a few guests begin to leave. Their carts are packed, their hats perched back on heads still sticky from marzipan. One waves to you, the sugar fox from last night peeking out of their bag, now missing an ear. It looks better that way. A young page circles the room with a basket of farewell tokens. Inside, small bundles wrapped in linen and tied with colored thread. You accept yours and peek inside. Dried rose petals, a sugared date, and a folded card that reads, to remember the night the goat won the pageant, the cheese sang a lullaby, and the pudding declared war. You smile. Beside you, Lady Maven is sketching something in charcoal. A loose, whimsical depiction of the feast. A jester throwing custard, the bird pie mid-eruption, Osric holding a ladle like a scepter. She hands it to the page. "Hang that in the kitchens," she says. "Let them never forget." Sir Aldred is fast asleep at the table, one hand clutching a bread roll, the other still wrapped in a napkin like it's expecting combat. The storyteller leans over and tucks a blanket across his shoulders. "There's a saying," she murmurs, mostly to herself. "A feast ends in crumbs, but the memory stays in your teeth." You nod. Even now, you can still taste traces of blue cheese, spiced pear, and at least one turnip that was definitely undercooked. It's the taste of chaos, of risk, of something unforgettable and slightly unwise. And you wouldn't trade it for anything. Someone begins packing instruments. Someone else sweeps glittering sugar shards into a jar labeled for next year. A few of the servants are writing down recipes, each more mythical than the last. Soup that sings, invisible pudding, boar that may or may not be cooked. You take a final walk through the hall, past the banners, past the smudges where pie once clung, past the spot where the goat fell asleep. Everything looks different in the daylight, smaller, softer, like waking up from a dream and realizing it was real. Outside, your carriage waits. You climb in slowly, delicately, your limbs still cautious from custard lunges and pudding-induced limbo. The driver tips his cap. The wheels creak forward, and Glenmere recedes behind you. You look back only once. The great hall glows, the flags wave in the gentle breeze, and a single white ribbon from the Feast of Flavors flutters down from the rooftop like a farewell kiss from the sky. You tuck your little linen bundle into your coat, lean your head against the carriage wall, and exhale. The journey home begins, but part of you, maybe the sticky part, maybe the part that still dreams of stew waltzes, stays behind. The road away from Glenmere is lined with frost-tipped hedges and the occasional startled hare, bounding through underbrush like it too had one too many sugared beets last night. The countryside rolls past in soft greens and browns, the sky slowly bluing overhead as the last of the feast's haze burns off. You nestle deeper into the carriage's cushions, arms crossed over your chest like a knight at rest, albeit one armed only with memories and probably some residual cheese in your sleeve. The coach rocks gently. You find yourself replaying moments from the night not as clear events, but as impressions. The heat of the hearth during the custard duel, the high pitch of the singing cheese, the crisp crack of the sugar tower's collapse, that one juggler's expression after the pair hit his flute mid-note. They swirl together, not in order but in flavor. This is how Glenmere sticks with you, not by logic, but by lingering delight, by laughter caught in the folds of your cloak, and the whisper of marzipan monks in your dreams. You stop for a moment beneath an old tree to stretch your legs. Beside the carriage, a small inn stands, weathered stone, crooked roof, a swinging sign in the shape of a turnip with wings. The feathered root. It's called You Smile. Inside, a handful of travelers sip broth, dip crusty bread, speak in low tones about crop rotations and a blacksmith's stubborn ox, the kind of calm only achievable by those who've never had to dodge pudding mid-course. You listen for a while. One old woman begins to tell a tale. A feast once up at Glenmere. They say the cheese sang. You freeze, she continues, and the ghost king ate nothing, but left a pear. The farmer chuckles. They say a goat judged a pageant. They say a bird flew out of the pie and cursed a bishop, adds a passing server. You say nothing. You simply sit back in your corner, wrap your hands around a mug of cider, and let the tale travel without you. This is legacy. This is how stories move, quietly, warmly, passed from voice to voice like candlelight in the dark. Back in the carriage, you pull out the tiny feast log the storyteller left tucked into your cloak. On the back, a scribble in charcoal. Come back next year. The goat misses you. You don't laugh. You just smile. The wheels roll on. The sun rises higher. The hills stretch out ahead, and somewhere behind you, the echoes of Glenmere still hum. Not loudly, but enough to know you were there, enough to know it mattered. The countryside unfolds like a sleepy yawn. You pass through quiet hamlets and frost-covered fields, where shepherds wave with mittened hands and children pretend to be knights battling invisible pudding beasts. Your body has mostly forgiven you, your mind, still full of whipped cream philosophies and goat-induced wisdom. The carriage rounds a bend and enters a narrow forest path. Sunlight dapples the ground. The road narrows, and you find yourself oddly alert, as if Glenmuir's enchantment has opened some small inner door labeled, "Awake, Fool." Adventure happens. Around the next bend, the driver slows. A cart is stuck ahead. One wheel has sunk into a muddy rut. Its driver, a wiry man in a hat 3 sizes too big, is tugging at the reins of a mule who clearly doesn't want to participate in the recovery process. You call out, "Need help?" The man looks up. "Only if you've got magic or a second wheel." You climb down slowly. Your knees creak. The mule sneezes together, with some heaving and 3 failed attempts involving a rope, a rock, and a stern lecture directed at the wheel. The cart lurches free. The man wipes his brow. "Appreciate that," he says, then squints. "Say, you look like you've seen a feast." You nod. "Glenmuir." His eyes widen. "Oh, that Glenmuir." He pulls something from his coat. A small tin. "Got this from a peddler last year. Said it came from Glenmuir's sugar storm." I didn't believe it. He opens the lid. Inside, a crumbled sugar flower. Violet, brittle, still shimmering faintly. You smile. "It's real." He offers it to you. "Keep it. Sounds like you earned it." You take it, carefully. You tuck it into your coat, next to the ribbon and the goat-drawn doodle. It joins your growing collection of improbable truths. Back in the carriage, you settle into the rhythm of motion again. The forest fades behind you. Fields return. Birds arc overhead, tracing invisible lines toward somewhere simpler. And just as the rooftops of a town begin to peek over the hills, you hear a distant sound. It's faint. Wind? A flute? No, laughter. Not just any laughter. The low, warm kind that comes from bellies fed too well and hearts caught between disbelief and memory. The kind that echoes from walls that saw too much, survived too much, and still sang at the end. Glenmuir, still with you. Still ridiculous. Still perfect. You whisper mostly to yourself, "Next year, the goat will be waiting." You arrive at your destination by mid-afternoon. The town, your town, is quieter, flatter, more reasonable in every way than the delightfully unstable reality you left behind. The buildings are practical. The streets, dusty but familiar. The baker waves as you pass, his hands coated in honest, simple flour. Not powdered sugar from a marzipan bishop explosion. You nod, smile, and try not to look like someone who witnessed a cheese tower collapse in solemn silence. Your home welcomes you with creaking doors and the soft sigh of wood adjusting to your return. The fire is out. The hearth cold. The cat, previously believed missing, glares at you from the windowsill as if to say, "And where have you been?" You light the fire slowly. Not because it's cold, but because it feels right. Ritual. A quieter echo of the flames that sealed the feast's end. A moment to mark a new chapter. The after feast. You place your Glenmuir bundle on the shelf above the hearth. The ribbon. The sugar flower. The tiny, scribbled drawing of a goat holding a custard bowl aloft like a trophy. None of them valuable. All of them priceless. Next to them you place the final offering. A small, bent spoon. Unearthed from your cloak's inner pocket this morning. Dicky. Slightly bent at the handle. You don't remember how it got there, but you do remember waving a spoon during turnip despair. So, maybe it was a weapon of hope. You don't need much tonight. Just bread, cheese, an apple. The kind of meal that once seemed plain, now almost regal in its simplicity. You eat it slowly, reverently, with the confidence of someone who's faced down a singing dairy product and lived to tell the tale. Outside, the light fades. You make a note on a scrap of parchment. Send thanks to Glenmuir. Bribe someone for next year's invite. You pause. Then add, ask if the goat is single. You chuckle to yourself. It echoes in your empty room like the last puff of flour from a collapsed sugar keep. And then you sleep. No parade. No dance. No custard duel. Just the quiet closing of your eyes and the faint, faint sound of distant feasting. Echoing not from the world, but from your own very full, very happy, very ridiculous memory. You awaken to silence. Not the eerie kind, but the honest kind. the kind where morning hasn't quite figured itself out yet. Outside, a soft drizzle taps the roof. Inside, the hearth glows gently, embers still alive from last night's quiet fire. You stretch. Nothing aches today. Not your stomach. Not your legs. Not even your dignity. You rise and move slowly, carefully, like someone returning to gravity after floating in the sugared, chaotic orbit of a feast too large for its own banquet tables. At the table, you find crumbs. Not the sugary ones from Glenmere, but oat crumbs. Familiar, dry, honest. You eat them anyway. Mid-bite, there's a knock at the door. It's the courier. A familiar lad with a crooked smile and an uncanny ability to arrive exactly when you're in the middle of chewing. He hands you a scroll. Wax seal. Gold trim. You don't have to open it to know who it's from. But you do. It reads, "To our dearest survivor of the Glenmere Revel, thank you for your valor, your patience, and your ability to dodge flan-related projectiles. We are already preparing next year's course lineup, featuring basil-infused candle soup, stuffed apples of uncertain origin, possibly edible wafers, now more edible. You are formally invited to serve as witness, participant, and possible juggler substitute. It is signed with a flourish and what appears to be a paw print. Probably the goat. You smile, roll the scroll, and place it beside the sugar flour. Later, you step out into the drizzle with your hood pulled low. The market square is alive with mundane chatter, eggs, wool, someone arguing about turnip weights. It's ordinary, beautifully so. You pass a stall selling pears. You stop. You buy one. And when you bite into it, it tastes like memory, like a feast held between stars and stew, where nothing made sense but everything mattered. You keep walking. A child runs past, cape flying behind them, yelling, "You be the goat, I'll be the king." You raise an eyebrow. Perhaps the legend spreads faster than expected. Back home, you sit at your window, sipping weak tea, watching rain carve stories into the dirt paths. The town moves around you, grounded and unchanged. But you've feasted with fools and kings. You've survived cursed birds, morning cheese, and frozen sweets that whispered forgotten lullabies. You carry it all, not as burden, but as seasoning. Life tastes better now. Because somewhere, behind the mist and past the turnip fields, there is a hall where the wine flows sideways, the ghosts dine politely, and the goat is always watching, and someday soon you'll return. Days pass. The feast recedes, slowly, like a dream that leaves behind only glimmers. You find yourself smiling at odd moments. You hum the stew dance while folding laundry. You reach for cheese and hesitate, just briefly, wondering if it might sing back. The town continues. Markets open. Mills turn. Gossip flows. Someone claims to have seen a turnip shaped like the bishop. You don't comment, and yet, the Glenmere spark hasn't left you. You start noticing things. The curve of a pear in a fruit basket that reminds you of the Ghost King's untouched offering. A flash of violet in a garden that calls back the sugar blossoms. Even the rain, which once was nuisance, now feels theatrical, part of some long-forgotten pageant involving ducks, pies, and wildly impractical hats. You're not changed in the dramatic way epic tales demand. No new title, no epic reward. But something is different. You carry joy more easily. You greet absurdity with curiosity. You've tasted failure seasoned with laughter and found it delicious. You return to your daily life, yes. But now, when something goes awry, when a cake collapses or a dinner guest shows up a day early, or a chicken escapes, you don't sigh. You raise a goblet in your mind and think, ah, the feast continues. You begin writing things down. Little memories, fragments, descriptions of the goat's pageant twirl, a sketch of the custard duel's final spoon flurry, a line about the cheese tower's slow collapse that reads like poetry. If you squint, you tuck these notes into a drawer. You don't know why, not yet. But one morning, with the window open and birds calling in the distance, you find yourself drafting a letter to a friend, to a stranger, to someone who hasn't been to Glenmere yet. You write, "There's a place where the food is unpredictable, the floors are sticky, and your sense of reality is gently chewed like a marzipan goat. You must go." And you seal it with wax. Not because it's important, but because Glenmuir taught you. Everything is more fun with a little ceremony. Later, you take a walk through the orchard. The trees are just beginning to bloom, white petals drifting lazily through the air like powdered sugar shaken from a too-proud tart that a bee buzzes past. You pause, close your eyes, and for one brief, perfect moment, you hear music. Faint, ridiculous, beautiful, and you laugh. Because you know now it was never really about the feast. It was about being there when the feast became a story. The seasons change. Glenmuir's snow cream becomes legend. The goat is rumored to have been knighted. A bard passes through your town singing a song titled Custard and Consequence, featuring a suspiciously familiar cast of characters. You smile. The tale is spreading, and though the world carries on with its usual clatter, coins clinking, carts rumbling, clouds pretending they don't plan to rain, you move through it with something new folded inside you. Something soft, something sweet. Some mornings you wake with the scent of saffron in your dreams. Some nights, your spoon tings against the side of your bowl and your heart lurches, wondering briefly if the cheese might be about to harmonize. And then you remember, no, not here. But somewhere. In Glenmuir, perhaps, or in the dream of it, where stew is a song, goats give life advice, and pie is only the beginning of the danger. The invitation will come again. It always does. Maybe in the form of a letter. Maybe in a whisper at a market stall. Or maybe in a glint of recognition in a stranger's eyes when you both reach for the last pear and pause, just long enough to remember a ghost king who dined in silence. For now, life resumes. You chop onions. You mend things. You laugh more easily. When someone spills soup, you don't flinch. You ask if they'd like to dance the barley waltz. One evening, you prepare a simple supper. Just bread, cheese, wine. You bite into the cheese. It's quiet, still. But you hum a little tune, just to be safe. You eat slowly. You finish the last crumb, raise your glass and whisper, to no one in particular, to the feast. Because the truth is, once you've dined at Glenmuir, truly dined, you never really leave. You just carry it differently. Like a song only you remember. Like a laugh echoing through your ribs. Like a goat at the edge of your dreams, chewing thoughtfully on a custard-smeared ribbon. And now, at last, you're ready to sleep, to drift, to return. Whenever the feast calls again. And now, let your breathing slow. You've journeyed far tonight. Not just through time, but through taste, texture, sound. Through the laughter of nobles and the wisdom of goats. Through puddings that wobbled with pride and cheeses that whispered lullabies only the brave dared hear. Let the warmth of the hearth wrap around your shoulders again. Hear the soft clink of distant goblets, fading into memory. Let your body settle, heavier now in the best way. Federal full, satisfied. The hall is quiet, the tables cleared, candles low. The storyteller's voice long since faded into the hush of embers. Feel your heartbeat soften, your thoughts, like spilled breadcrumbs, trailing off into stillness. Each breath you take draws you deeper into calm, into quiet. You are safe. The stew has stopped waltzing. The pie birds have gone to roost. The goat, bless him, has curled up by the fire and finally stopped chewing. And you are exactly where you need to be. There will be other nights, other feasts, but for now, let this one settle in your bones, sweet and absurd and perfect in its imperfection. The world can wait. Sleep, dear guest. Sleep deep. Sleep well.